for those of you who aren't familiar with the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network, um, we are the first and only national technical assistance center that's federally supported, that's dedicated to grand families and kinship families, by which we mean grandparents, other relatives, close family friends, people who aren't related to the child or the family but are close with them, who are raising children when parents can't. And on the next slide, you'll see just a little bit about us. We work with 8 systems that impact the families. So, we're really focused as well on the many more children who have no foster care involvement. And we calculate that there are 18 children outside of foster care with kin for every 1 child in foster care with kin. Actually, it's been updated to 19 now that I think about it, because we have more recent data. So we work with all these systems, and on the next slide, you'll see if you work at a nonprofit, community-based organization, faith-based organization, government agency within any one of those 8 systems, and would like some individual no-cost assistance, please reach out to us using that form in the upper right, and we can always connect you as well with our speakers today. And many others. We have a whole cadre of subject matter experts and 5 national partners who are part of this work. We also have a website with lots of original resources to help you better serve the families, kinship families. Webinars, lots of webinars, including the one today, a couple of coming up in February and March. So do stay connected. That link will take you to the landing page for all of our webinars. And we do have a whole host of past webinars that recorded and saved there on that landing page as well. And then finally, we're doing quite a bit of intensive assistance in 3 jurisdictions: San Diego County, Idaho, the state of Idaho, and Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, and working with them to bridge those systems. That umbrella I showed you of the 8 government systems and many community-based nonprofits in those jurisdictions, to leverage existing assets and better serve the families with what's there and what's trusted in the community. On the next slide, you will see photos of our fabulous presenters today, and they are great representatives of that, just that kind of thing. Really, truly community-based organizations that are trusted by kin caregivers and that are crucial partners of state agencies to really best serve the families. I will let them introduce themselves because they will do it more justice, but just know that we love working with them and they are fabulous colleagues. And I will turn it to you, Angela, to introduce yourself first.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I see people from all over the country and some caregivers and people from KCC. So just thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. My name is Dr. Angela Tobin, and I am the founder and executive director of Kinship Caregivers Connect in Ohio. I actually founded it as a graduate student over 5 years ago now, and have since turned it into a nonprofit. The reason I started it was just experience in my own family, with my parents being kinship caregivers to my cousin and my grandparents previously being kinship caregivers to him. So it's just been such an honor to meet so many kinship families over the years. We do 2 support groups a week, so that's a lot of time with caregivers, and I really enjoy it. I also am a program senior implementation specialist at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. We do work with caregivers in South Carolina and now in North Carolina as well. And finally, I'm the founder of Angela Tobin Kinship Consulting. So just trying to get training on a systematic level as well, because I think we really have to approach kinship care at all levels. So it's great to be here today, and I'm so glad to have Allie with me as well.
Hi, and good morning or good afternoon. I'm Dr. Allie Caliendo. I am the founder and executive director of Foster Kinship. We are in Nevada. Started about 15 years ago as a very grassroots organization, built a model that is now evidence-based in the federal clearinghouse. And in the last 15 years, we have served almost 13,000 kinship families, and they are our favorite population to work with, and we're really excited to be here today. So thank you so much.
All right, I think we can go to the next slide. So today we're here to talk about engaging kinship caregivers in the community and what that engagement can look like. So hopefully you'll walk away today with some strategies and also just seeing engagement maybe from a different light. You can go to the next slide. So an agenda, first we'll talk about what does engagement even mean? And then really go into common barriers of engagement. We will want to hear from you. We hope to make this interactive. And really, what are the strategies at different levels to facilitate meaningful engagement with kinship families? And finally, we'll take that macro level of how do we build a community of support across systems. And finally, we hope you'll join us in the Q&A with the second Zoom link after this presentation. So we would love to get to know you first. You can choose to answer one or both of these questions, but this will help us in the presentation too. What is one challenge you have experienced with engaging kinship families in your work? And what is one strength in engaging kinship families? And if you are a kinship caregiver on here, you can answer the question like, what has been one challenge for you engaging, or what is one strength for you engaging with programs or services? So feel free to answer in the chat. Yeah, I see some responses coming in. Financial restraints. I'm here to help the family. So many families live out of the area and out of the state. Keeping caregivers engaged in programming, reluctance to accept resources, caregivers being overwhelmed. We see financial coming up quite a bit. Thank you all for adding your responses. Time constraints, childcare needs. So these are definitely some things that we'll hopefully touch on today and hope to continue the discussion beyond beyond the webinar and the Q&A chat. You can go to the next slide. So let's start. What is engagement? You can go to the next slide. Perfect. So we actually looked into other services and organizations, how they define caregiver and family engagement. These were two definitions that I really liked. And then you'll see us adapt it for kinship families because we didn't really find one specific to kinship care. The Head Start program is run by the United States Department of Health and Human Services. I love their definition. It says, an interactive process through which program staff and families, family members and their children build positive and goal-oriented relationships. It is a shared responsibility of families and professionals that requires mutual respect for the roles and strengths each has to offer. I love this part. Family engagement means doing with, not doing to or for families. I feel like that's so key. And sometimes we can fall into the trap of doing for families because we really want to help them, but meaningful engagement is doing it with them. A school definition by Bachman and Beard is a balanced and equitable partnership between educators and parents characterized by open and reciprocal relationships built on mutual trust and regard for one another's roles. The purpose of the partnership is to promote conditions for student learning and well-being through shared knowledge, skills, and resources. So we can start to see some common themes. You can go to the next slide. So what are some themes that we pulled out of this? Breaking down engagement. First, the how. Engagement really needs to start from a relational or partnership lens. It can't just be a transactional checklist. That type of engagement will rarely work, especially with kinship families. So really, it's important to build that trust and have that mutual respect. And sometimes that takes time, but starting from that place will make engagement much more successful down the road. And again, walking with families and making sure what we're doing is like caregiver-led and empowering to the families themselves. Finally, engagement isn't just that relationship. We also want to have a goal in mind. What are we hoping to help the family achieve? And of course, we're all here to support kinship families, but that support might look different for everyone. So really building individualized goals with families and always supporting their autonomy, self-efficacy, skill, and knowledge building so they can be successful beyond just the direct, support we're providing to them with them. And then finally, the context, especially with kinship care, I think we have to make sure everything we're doing is trauma-informed and culturally responsive to meet the needs of kinship families. And this means we have to be adaptable and open to changing over time. Protocols are great. Having a set way to do things is great, but I think really in order to engage with kinship families, we have to be open and learn from them and change with them. You can go to the next slide. So this is a definition that we came up with around kinship care. The process of connecting, forming, and sustaining a mutual, individualized, and family-centered partnership with kinship caregivers and their families to support their autonomy and well-being. Some components of this: trust and kinship engagement is built when caregivers experience shared understanding, genuine welcome, and expert guidance that respects their right to decide what is best for their family. So it's really putting the power into families' hands and being there with them. Engagement should be an individualized process that works towards caregivers' self-identified needs and goals. And I think Allie could agree. We've never met two kinship families that are the same. There's so many complexities, especially within kinship care. So we really have to take an individualized approach. And finally, engagement does not stop at the initial connection. It would be easy that way if it did, but really, just as the caregivers are experiencing a journey over time, that engagement is a journey over time. And Allie will even talk about how engagement might look different in different periods. You can go to the next slide. And so we put together this pyramid of engagement, and it really shows different ways that caregivers may be engaging with your program and services. And I think the first two are often the given ones that we go to naturally. The second two we might not think of as often, but they're actually necessary in order for the first two to be successful. So it really goes from the bottom to the top. Outreach is something so important, something that even when I started my support group, a person was like, good luck getting any caregivers to show up, right? It's like that idea that we have to reach caregivers and they're a hard to reach population. So outreach is definitely a really important step that we have to be intentional about in being in different spaces. But it can include programming recruitment and family finding practices. So really casting a wide net, but also having some individualized outreach approaches. Ways that we can measure this are the number of outreach efforts and then the number of referrals from self or the community that these lead to. Next, we have intake and attendance. So hopefully there's an intake process, and really what that is that initial interaction as a doorway to services. I like to think of it as an interview where we can get to know the caregiver, but also the caregiver can get to know us. So again, all of these things are two-directional. And then also attendance. So it's actually taking that next step to show up to the programming and participate. Ways that we can measure this is number of intake calls and surveys and program attendance. And I think a lot of times we stop at program attendance, but it's actually really important to consider engagement on these next two levels. So community building. This is really bi-directional, right? So it takes time. It's integrating with a program over time, but a caregiver really seeing themselves as a part of a community and something that they can give back to as well. So an example of this is caregivers referring other caregivers to the program. I think that's the most powerful outreach method. So again, we're circling back to outreach. And also retention over time. We don't just want caregivers to attend once, but we really want them to receive supports in their journey as they need it over time as well. And then finally, co-leadership. So this is something that has to be intentionally done, but is so important. I think Allie will touch more on it. But really caregivers as stakeholders, decision makers, and staff members, and not just saying we have a caregiver advisory council, but really having caregivers lead the work intentionally. So some outcomes we have are the number of staff with lived experience. It could be an advisory council. And again, just caregivers being actively involved in seeing themselves as a part of the organization. So again, those last two are challenging, but I think we really have to stretch ourselves to build those in intentionally to also be successful at the outreach and intake and attendance. So you can go to the next slide. And I'm going to hand it over to Allie now to talk about practical ways to build engagement.
Thanks, Angela. So we really wanted to share how we build trust in practice because we believe that trust is the foundation of really good engagement. So we've broken down building trust into lived experience, hospitality, and expertise. And together, these are what can get real outcomes for families. We know that kinship caregivers often arrive carrying grief, role confusion, trauma, and the weight of systems that they never chose to enter because many did not raise their hand for this role. Instead, they were called in the middle of the night. So when engagement staff bring lived experience with kinship care, foster care, or adjacent challenges, it actually immediately changes the tone of the relationship because it signals, you are not alone, I've been here, I understand the complexity of what you're saying, and I'm not here to judge you. Lived experience doesn't replace professional boundaries or expertise, but families no longer feel they are being evaluated from a distance. They are met as partners, which creates relational safety. And hospitality is what makes that safety tangible. So it's the intentional creating of dignity-affirming spaces where families can breathe, Many kinship caregivers have been conditioned to expect surveillance, blame, or consequences in cold government buildings. So a warm environment with a warm welcome, unhurried interactions, and clear communication will all work to disrupt that expectation. Hospitality can help family feel you are welcome and understood. And then expertise can become something offered, not imposed. Assessment will be done with families, not to them. And staff bring real skill in understanding needs, risks, and options, but they don't use that knowledge to control. Instead, they are explaining trade-offs and constraints and supporting caregivers in making informed choices, even when those choices are not what a system would prefer. So when this all comes together, goals can become more realistic and aligned with real capacity, and engagement will go deeper. And next slide, please. So the core components of trust building do not change across the caregiver journey. What changes is what families need at each stage. And we've broken it out into 3 stages here, but there's probably more we could get into. But in initial caregiving, families are defined by that crisis and role disruption, and immediate needs are overshadowing the ability to think long term. So at this stage, engagement can't be about goal setting or future planning. It really has to be about creating emotional safety. So lived experience will say, I understand how overwhelming this is. Hospitality provides that safety, and expertise says, I will help you solve what's right in front of you. And the outcome we are seeking here is that families stay engaged instead of withdrawing or avoiding help. Now, as families begin to stabilize, a new normal starts to emerge, and while stress is still high, it becomes more predictable. So this is the moment when caregivers are ready to ask, how do I make this work for the longer term? And engagement can shift from crisis response to capacity building with the family. And then we are looking here for families to begin experiencing engagement as very useful rather than threatening. And then at or around permanency, caregiving is really integrated into family identity, but the child's trauma often surfaces once the crisis has passed. It's a new challenge, but caregivers can think long-term. So engagement here is about long-term planning, growth, and healing. And the outcome is really focusing on well-being for children because caregivers will have the capacity to lead their families forward. So across every stage, trust is built through consistency and matching where families actually are. Next slide, and we're going to watch a video featuring Yaya from Kinship Caregivers Connect, which describes different ways she has been involved in the organization.
So, as you said, my name is Yaya, and I believe I've been with KCC since the start of it. Well, the onset, which was 2020, and I came as a caregiver of 2 of my grandkids, looking for support. I felt alone. Had so many emotions, but the main one was feeling alone. So when I heard about the support group, I hopped on, and I've been with you ever since. And along the way, I have became the Kinship Family Specialist and also a research member. So I kind of got 3 roles now with the support group. Wow. 5 years ago when I started KCC, I remember always crying, always crying. I was so broken when I started. I'm still broken. However, piece by piece, I'm getting taped back together because I have found a support group, so many other caregivers like myself along this journey of raising grandkids. So 5 years in, or maybe 6 years in now, I feel stronger. I feel more equipped with resources. So I feel empowered. That's the word, empowered. To raise these little people.
That's amazing.
So I went from broken to empowered. So when I started, I was a participant. And then over time, I became the Kinship Family Specialist. And I have to keep those 2 separate when I'm on as a co-host or main host. That's my title. And I have to sometimes remember that and not come off with my emotions and feelings as a participant. So I have to keep that in mind. It can be hard because I started as a participant and I was a participant for 5 years before I took on this role. Talking to someone with lived experience It's going to always be better because they are living it and their emotions and feelings are real. I love it. I love it. Um, before I got that position or that role, remember, I used to do some of the things I was doing, sending out the birthday cards, texting them, calling on them. I want them to know that they're not alone. So being able to be in contact with a lot of my caregivers with just those words, hey, checking on you, or dropping off, little gifts and things for them and keeping them updated when our celebrations are coming because they all look forward to that. It's just rewarding. And if I could say yesterday, one of our caregivers called me while she was sitting at the skating ring to say, Yaya, you are amazing. And I'm so glad to be a part of this group. And you got this. Because after a while, you're doing it because that's your calling. You forget that you're even getting paid for it, and to just go with it if it's your calling. I'm looking forward to getting more responsibilities. I'm looking forward to even doing trainings outside of you to build. I even looked into taking leadership classes and learning more about nonprofit through another agency here in Columbus, Ohio. Who would have thought this is where I would have been 6 years? Because I'm going on 6 years now.
I know.
So Yaya does such a good job in that video explaining and translating what trust and engagement looks like as almost programmatic behavior. In the crisis stage, staff are naming what families are feeling instead of fixing it. This is hard. Your reactions make sense. And hospitality needs to be that human scale, welcoming presence, customer service, calls returned, using a warm tone, and a sense that someone's paying attention. So Yaya mentioned birthday cards and celebrations. That's so important. Those details are so important. Expertise is really triage oriented. In the crisis stage, staff are focusing on what's urgent, offering clear and accurate information, supplying basic needs, and avoid pushing decisions. Again, our signal here is that you are safe. But as we move into stabilization, engagement really needs to become anticipatory. Lived experience helps caregivers recognize patterns before they feel like personal failure. Hospitality is welcoming and now predictable. Families know who will follow up and when, and expertise can shift into decision making. So here's where staff can lay out options and trade-offs for legal or financial support so caregivers can choose. And the signal here is that you are capable and we will walk alongside you as you decide you make the best decision for your family, as long as you have all the good information. And in the healing stage, engagement becomes sustained rather than reactive. So lived experience is going to validate identity shifts and ambiguous loss along the journey. Hospitality remains ongoing and is practical, not crisis-based. And expertise now focuses on boundaries, long-term planning, and healing for both the child and the caregiver, and ideally, parents when possible. And the signal to families here is you are not just surviving now, but we are building a future where you can all thrive. So this engagement is a discipline that must be programmatically built into systems of support. Next slide, I'm passing it back to Angela, please.
Thank you so much, Ali. And thank you, Yaya, too. We'll hear from Yaya again soon. But now we'll really get into what does this look like? So facilitators and barriers for engaging kinship families. And I appreciate all the barriers and strengths you all shared in the chat. So I think that some of this will resonate. You can go to the next slide. So we really believe that it's important to look at engagement from an ecological or multi-systems approach. I think sometimes we fall into the trap of just looking at engagement at the family level or just looking at it at the systems level and staying siloed in that, but it's actually important for everyone to look at engagement from all three levels to be successful. So I'm going to talk about the micro and meso level, and Ali will talk about the macro. The micro level is at that family level with the individual family. The meso level is the organization, structure, and programming. And then macro level, we're really looking at coordination and support across systems. Next slide, please. So some barriers, a lot of these came up already. working with kinship families to their engagement. First off is that initial interaction. Again, especially if they're in the beginning of their journey, there's likely feelings of overwhelm, being in fight or flight. Also, we have to recognize when children come into kinship care, it's traumatic for the child and also for the entire family. So caregivers are often going through those experiences of trauma themselves, which is why a trauma-informed approach is crucial. And really, we're starting at a deficit with a need to build trust for families. It's not something that's automatic. So this is always something we need to be intentional about and put work into. And this is really taking that customer service approach as well. So again, the family may not even know they're a kinship family. And I know there's so much wording around like grandfamilies, kinship families, grandparents raising grandchildren. There's different language that we use. But I know most people themselves aren't familiar with the term kinship care in the general population. So that may be a barrier to them even knowing that the supports are available or engaging. And also they may be getting mixed information from differing systems. It's important to be aware that kinship families are really navigating so many different systems at once, each with their own eligibility, each with their own criteria. And sometimes they are getting misinformation from systems. That can be exhausting, and honestly, it can be frustrating and kind of discouraging to want to engage in more support. So we have to recognize that and again, use the strategies that build trust and show that we're different and there to support them. And of course, lack of time, energy, and capacity to engage. Caregiving is a 24/7 role and takes so much energy. What I've learned is once caregivers come to a meeting for us and see that it's helpful and worth their time, they're more willing to come back. Sometimes just getting them to come to that first meeting is the initial challenge, but then realizing if something is helpful for them, they will build in time and capacity for that as much as they can. And of course, we're understanding and flexible on our end too. So I think voluntary services can help with that. And then finally, feeling that services or systems are being done to them instead of with them, especially the child welfare system, can feel intrusive and not something that families have always opted into. So that may be a barrier to them wanting to engage in other services. But the good news is there is strategies that we can engage for kinship families to overcome these barriers. So you can go to the next slide. So we're going to listen to Yaya again, and she's going to talk about creating a safe space for caregivers. And I'd love for you to just listen to some of the things that she's pointed out that have been helpful. And if there's caregivers on this webinar, I'd love for you to put in the chat, how have services felt like a safe space, or how are you more likely to engage in certain community services? So you can play that now.
We have a mission statement, we have a value statement, and we make our families feel safe because a lot of them don't feel safe or can trust, and they feel like if they open up, they won't get help. But I think the main one is some caregivers are scared that they're going to be judged. And when I say judge, I mean judged by the system. I don't mean judged by other people, of the people that they're asking for help. Because if you think about it, we are kinship caregivers. So the system and everybody think this is what we're supposed to do when an event happens, when biological parents cannot take care of their kids. Because we are kin to these kiddos, we supposed to be doing this with no feelings, no emotions, no nothing. Suck it up and deal with it. But in reality, no. We're human too, and we have emotions and feelings, and this is not what we plan to do. We know that they're better off with us because we are kinship caregivers. We are kin, yes, but we have feelings too, and how these kiddos was brought into us. I think meeting the caregivers, kinship caregivers, where they are and giving them space for them to open up and to trust and not be afraid of judgment. Because you never know what a caregiver is going through. Just know that they're going through something as they try to navigate taking care of the kiddos in their life. A lot of us caregivers are older, trying to navigate raising kiddos and we want to be safe. And KCC support group give us that safe space. I have met caregivers who didn't think they were supposed to even have feelings. They wasn't supposed to have emotions. They do now. So meeting them where they are, wherever they are, whether they're broken, feel neglected, alone, depressed, meet them where they are and work with them to build that trust so they can feel okay opening up and sharing and saying, I can't do this alone. I need help. Because sometimes that's what they need. They just want to be heard. They just want to be heard. And all our caregiving stories is different. And we are able to express that with no judgment, but with a lot of understanding. Just reaching out, our check-in calls, keeping in contact with our caregivers, even if it's just to say, hey, checking on you. Because those 3 words mean a lot. Just to let them know we're still here. May not been on in a while, but that doesn't mean don't come back. When giving them that space and letting them know when they're ready, we're still here.
Thank you again so much, Yaya. She's on here too, and she'll be joining the Q&A as well. But if you don't take anything away from these slides, I really hope you just remember Yaya's videos and that idea of felt safety. I actually think that's at the crux of engaging kinship families. And that's not something we can do with a checklist or transactionally. That's something we really have to be intentional about and use trauma-informed strategies for. So I really hope that's something that resonates with you. And really, those individual interactions with families, I believe, are the most critical for their engagement. And really the impression that you leave with families. Sometimes this may be the first time they've felt safe to share their story. So I know during intake calls for us, I don't have like a 15-minute time limit. I actually try to leave at least 30 minutes or more so they can have time to share if that's what they would like to do. And really practicing that trauma-informed outreach, knowing those first connections matter. We'll have some specific trauma-informed strategies on the next slide. And again, really meeting each family on an individual level. So we always try to approach getting to know the caregiver with conversation and learning and curiosity rather than assessment. Sometimes we can have these forms and evaluations and things that we need to get completed, but don't start with those. Start with the conversation, start with getting to know the caregiver and what they need. Recognize that sharing is personal and it can be something that's triggering, especially if they felt like they've had to share without wanting to share previously. So it's really taking the caregiver's lead with what they're comfortable with, but that therapeutic use of self is key. Use understanding, non-judgment, and empathy, and that goes such a long way. Recognizing caregivers as the experts of their families and their needs. We're not the experts, the families are the experts, and also where they are on their journey. And again, taking a customer service approach, I feel like in marketing, this is something that's pushed so much, but we don't really think about it in human services because there's always a lot going on. But just remembering that nonverbal cues matter, our language matters, always making sure we're using strength-based language, providing adequate time and space for families, and really understanding what are these families' barriers to engagement, how can we help them overcome these barriers, and consistently seeking feedback from caregivers to show that you're listening and you want to make the supports as responsive as possible for them. Next slide, please. So here are some trauma-informed communication strategies. I love these. I'll give credit to Patrick Cunningham for these. But the first is remaining calm, making sure that we're in a calm state before talking to families, realizing that if this is their first time sharing and they want to share, they could get emotional. It could be a lot. They could be in crisis mode. So making sure we're ready to accept that and taking a deep breath. Being prepared to listen. Trusting caregivers as the experts and really actively listening to what they have to say. So this doesn't really mean having a script and having certain things to respond to, but actively listening and, adapting our responses to what they're sharing with us. Being positive is huge. I feel like so many times caregivers feel like they're doing this on their own. No one's seeing the small wins. They're not getting validation. Sometimes it's just like what's going wrong that's getting pointed out. So I really always love highlighting families' strengths. And this not only helps build trust, but it helps them build their own self-efficacy and what they're doing well. And even them just being there for a child is a win on its own. Being honest is super important, especially because caregivers often are getting misinformation from different systems. So we really want to share openly and willingly with families about what we know, and also being honest about what we don't know and following up with them after we look into that resource. And then finally, we're all here to be resourceful for families and connect them to the resources that they find the most helpful. Next slide, please. And now we're shifting to the organizational level. So these are organizational barriers that can happen. Lack of funding is something that, especially nowadays, we're all experiencing and trying to come up with creative solutions for, but that's definitely a barrier. Sometimes there's like funding options that might only include certain subpopulations of kinship care, so maybe only formal families or those over 55 years old. Siloing of work in departments, especially if organizations are serving more than kinship caregivers. Maybe other departments aren't aware of the work of departments that serve kinship caregivers. This is huge, and I think we've come a long way even within the past 5 years, but decreased awareness around kinship care and a kin first culture. I think previously there has been a bias against kinship care and just a misunderstanding of the benefits. So if we really want to have buy-in, and if we really want to support kinship families, and if we really believe that's what's best, that is what's needed to facilitate meaningful engagement. That's not going to happen if people aren't bought into the idea that kinship care is important and the needs are different than non-relative foster families. So that's really where training and staff capacity building comes in. Decreased staff capacity is also a barrier. Work overload and staff burnout are very real issues in human services. And then finally, lack of lived experience and representation among staff. So these are all very big issues. We don't have the solution to all of them, but we do have a few strategies. So you can go to the next slide. And so these are some organizational level strategies offering various programming and different options for accessibility, including as many caregivers as possible in our services with broad inclusion criteria, even if the funding doesn't cover it. This will also help like your reputation in the community if you're able to serve as many caregivers as possible. Intentionally hiring and training peer liaisons and those with lived experience. We actually have a webinar about this in March with the network. Prioritizing organization-wide diversity and cultural responsiveness. This could be a whole nother webinar, but it's really important for those being served to see themselves in those that are serving them. Consistently gathering caregivers' feedback through evaluations, but also informally. Seek funding from programs around the population's needs and not just getting the funding for something that might not be that helpful to the population. And finally, building a strength-based, kin-first, and kin-responsive culture. So lots of things here, but I think really leading with believing in kinship families is where to start. You can go to the next slide, please. And I won't go through these again, but really intentionally building in opportunities for caregivers to be involved beyond just outreach and taking attendance, moving towards that community building and co-leadership, and having those with lived experience as a part of the team has made us so much better and such a difference for KCC. I'm going to hand it back over to Allie now.
Thank you so much. And we can go to the next slide. But keep that pyramid in mind because we want to talk really about what it's like to engage caregivers at that co-leadership level of the engagement period. And a pyramid and co-leadership, in one way that we measure it is we look at the percentage of staff with lived experience, as Angela showed earlier. And, it's really important at foster kinship. I think we're averaging around 80% of our staff have lived experience, which makes a huge difference. But how do we make sure that our organization is prepared to have individuals with lived experience? And I'm speaking of myself too, because I've been in many different of these roles myself. So first, we make sure that experience is a core qualification and it's complementary to professional training. So we're looking for professionals who carry both with them when they're looking to join us. And this means that these roles in your organization must not be symbolic. Caregivers with lived experience need real responsibility, influence, and pathways for growth. We also acknowledge that there is an added complexity to bringing lived experience into any organization, because while it deepens insight, it can also carry emotional strain. And this work can be very triggering if you're living it at home and you're, in front of it every day. So at Foster Kinship, we do wait until caregivers are out of that crisis phase and ideally in that healing stage before inviting co-leadership. And then we provide clarity, supervision, boundaries, and support, understanding what we're asking of individuals to come in and serve others. And to do this well, we really need to build a trauma-informed workplace for everyone. This looks like clear expectations, psychological safety, competitive pay or stipends, childcare, and adaptable schedules. These benefit the whole workforce, but they are trauma-informed workforce practices. And we also make sure we're not asking caregivers to share their stories over and over without offering influence in our work. We also normalize disagreement and complexity because, as Yaya stated, one person's experience does not represent the whole. We do need to hear from all voices. And finally, we close feedback loops. So when caregivers provide us feedback, they know that we are changing and shaping the way we're doing our systems. Next slide. Okay, so now we're getting into almost even a harder question, and that is what happens when the systems themselves at the macro level are not built to support engagement. Many challenges that we attribute to families are actually produced by policy design. So federal and state frameworks that govern child welfare, benefits, and courts are prioritizing compliance timelines, eligibility thresholds, liability management, and they were not built with kinship care in mind. And laws often treat kinship families as if they exist in a traditional foster care context, which limits flexibility, constrains our relational work. And for example, one-size-fits-all rules such as child support requirements for child-only TANF. This does not reflect kinship realities, and it discourages shared decision-making out of fear of non-compliance. And as we talked about, in compliance-driven systems, engagement is transactional. Funding structures prioritize documentation, timelines, risk management over relationship building. Compliance is reinforced through that restrictive funding, like Angela mentioned, and now many programs rely on narrow streams that are excluding some kinship families altogether, which is actually embedding inequity into who can be served and how. And power imbalances are built into system design. Families receive a clear message over time through these systems. Authority for what's happening in their home lives outside their home. Fragmentation and systemic lack of talking compounds all of this. So caregivers are navigating courts, education, healthcare, benefit systems, all independently, telling their story multiple times to agencies that are not communicating. And oftentimes in our systems, lived experience is tokenized, means that caregivers are invited to give their feedback, but without any real power, which reinforces these dynamics. So we're seeing caregivers disengage, not because they lack insight, but because they are realizing that they're not changing anything. Or they may be declining services because of a history of poor experiences with systems, and not because they are indifferent or they don't have a need. So next slide. Okay, so here's the challenge. Trust is built in relationships, but it's eroded by systems. And so how do we operate in both worlds at the same time? We believe the strategy is to bridge community partnering with system partnership. So this combines the reality of a top-down system that's designed to sort of have a compliance-driven kinship experience with the bottom-up approach to family engagement that we believe kinship support organizations can bring. Next slide, we'll do a quick definition.
Stop for just a second. We have a question in the chat, and I don't want to move too far away from it.
Sure.
She wanted to know she thought it was item 6 or 7. It's 2 slides back row, where avoid extracting stories without, and she didn't capture everything you said.
So, and what I mean by that is caregivers' stories have often been used by organizations to, for example, they give testimony or they're telling their stories in order for the organization to get something. And it's really important that organizations who are working with caregivers with lived experience are combining storytelling with real authority and ability to change systems and not just sort of using that story basically as a means to an end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. That was great. Thank you, Allie.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to talk more about it. I have a lot of feelings.
Yeah, and we can talk about it during the Q&A as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so I think on one slide, okay, here we back are at the sort of definition. I'm going back to Head Start. Community engagement is defined as mutual strength-based partnership, but we also took a look at the Kinship Navigator statute in the Social Security Act because it kind of makes engagement a legal requirement. So we wanted to take a look at that. Under this law, a Kinship Navigator program should not simply be a referral service. It needs to be consultative by design, coordinating across systems, sharing accountability with caregivers and other people with lived experience. And it really needs to produce real outcomes. And we talked about this in some of the barriers: reduce fragmentation, meaningful access to benefits, or greater family stability. So engagement in this definition is not optional or symbolic. It is actually structural. And while this is the Kinship Navigator statute, we are arguing that this principle should extend to all kinship support services because we believe that effective programs do not merely serve families, but they're partnering with them, translating lived experience into systems improvement and holding that bridge. So we'll talk about that bridge on the next slide. Thank you. So community programs hold the relational trust that systems lack and can bring that trust back into system design. So these programs are a bridge for families, actually in building trust with the family and then bridging them into the necessary systems that they need. And it can also translate family experience into actionable insight for the systems. And we're partnering with public agencies to improve practice, policy interpretation, and design without sort of asking families to put themselves out there with these systems on their own. We can do it from a community partnership space so that they are also protected and they don't have to say, well, this was my experience and I'm demanding change. That's asking way too much from families and the power dynamics with the systems in which they interact. So next slide, please. Okay, so we are going to take a look back at the ecological systems lens now and operationalize community partnership across all levels. We'll go to the next slide. So on the left is a reminder of how families are moving through engagement bottom up all the way to co-leadership. And on the right is how systems operate. And this is top down from basically policy and legal frameworks all the way to the implementation on the ground. So community partnership is the bridge between these two things. And I want to talk about what that looks like at each level. So for outreach at the micro level, it's really that lived experience shaping initial contact. At the meso level, programs should co-develop outreach with trusted community partners and share consistent messaging, meet families where they already are. And the macro level then will formalize rapid referral pathways through contracts or court protocols so families are quickly connected to support. At intake and attendance, the goal is really to remove friction for families and reduce duplication. So micro practices would clarify purpose, confidentiality, participation, and perhaps even the point that this is voluntary, which is really helpful for family engagement. Meso strategies should be simplifying intake through shared screening, if possible, warm handoffs, and that coordination to reduce duplication. And then macro work is securing policies and data sharing agreements with the system that will make coordination with a community agency possible. Again, we're shifting the burden from families to systems, not from the family, but through community partnership. And then we'll go all the way up to co-leadership. Micro practice here supports caregiver leadership. And meso structures will create paid advisory and government roles on the system side. And macro systems are building feedback loops tied to agency commitments, public accountability. We're reporting and tracking outcomes across a community level, not just a program or system level. Next slide. Oh, I'm handing it back to Angela.
Thank you so much, Allie. I love how you brought all of those concepts together and thinking about engagement on all levels. So now we'll read some quotes from caregivers about how they perceive engagement. And thank you for those who have shared in the chat as well. These were findings from a research study that we did. So I'll just read a few of them for the sake of time. We really learned that peer support is the bread and butter of KCC. So one quote from a caregiver was, "KCC is a big, warm, fuzzy hug that is also strong and tough and informed. The other parents are like me in at least one important way." Another caregiver shared, "Most importantly, I was connected with other people my age that were not only in the same ocean, but in my boat." Next slide, please. I like everything, sharing with others, learning from speakers, all the love that we have for each other, the confidentiality, the vulnerability, the laughter, the tears, sharing out the good, the bad, and everything. Next slide, please. This is quotes about the impact caregivers experience. It provided a needed inherent support and the emergency strength to push on in fighting for myself and advocating against the unfair barriers we face. I'm a year ahead where I was 3 months ago. I'm a successful caregiver. When I was alone, I had many fears. Once I had backup, it made a significant difference. Next slide, please. These are quotes about our specific model. Love Zoom from home. My schedule is crazy and the ease of joining in helps. The diversity of participants, the volume of information available, the director, she shares her experience and her entire family with us. And it's truly like one big family. It's extremely authentic. The power of people standing together behind a common set of strengths and weaknesses is palpable. So again, this is really describing the community we've built, not just the services that we provide. And I'll hand it over to Allie to read some quotes from her organization.
Thanks, Angela. We really wanted to share a few quotes from caregivers in our program that align with some of those core trust building principles that we have touched on. So next slide, please. And this really gets at how organizations can be that bridge to system resources. So this caregiver says, to have an organization created to bridge the gap of resources for families is a huge blessing. I needed help. Foster Kinship had the answers, a true testament of how collaboration between nonprofits and state agencies can be done. And next slide. I'm going to focus a little bit on the importance of hospitality and customer service because this cannot be overstated. These details matter so much to engagement across the journey, but also really in that initial crisis period. So one caregiver says, the team takes the time and burden away by providing responsive customer service. Each team member has been a joy to work with. You can feel it from each one of their staff. And then another caregiver is just talking about our space, nice, warm welcome, a clean, nice center. It's just really important to not be another government building that they have to interact with. And the next slide is about community building. And one of the metrics that we use at Foster Kinship for engagement and that community building space is when kinship families begin to support each other and stay engaged for the long term and participate more as mentors. This caregiver says, I love to bring all my donations to this place. They're always giving to the families truly in need of it. So it really is about caregivers who are past that crisis and are now able to give back in other ways to caregivers who are just starting their journey. And then lived experience. This is just a quote about one of our amazing family advocates. And they say, she consistently shows up with care, resources, and encouragement has made such a difference. Her peer parent support groups have helped me grow so much, giving me tools, confidence, and a community I didn't know I needed. So we just really wanted to reiterate the importance of all of that. We had one more video that we were going to show, but I think we'll put the link in the chat for you all. It's a caregiver that's worked with Foster Kinship for many years. But we're going to skip that and go to the big picture takeaway slide, please. So, I mean, I think Angela and I could probably talk about this for a long time. We've only had an hour. I mean, we were just joking. We could probably teach a whole semester on each one of these, slides, but we really wanted to just get this conversation started. And in closing, we really wanted to explain that creating a true culture of kinship engagement means we're building both deep and wide, requiring varied ways of working with families, and really recognizing that no single doorway is going to work for everyone. The diversity of kinship families is beautiful. So it means also engaging caregivers across their full journey and not just at moments of crisis. So it's very important not to have services shut off at certain points in the journey. The family is the family and they need engagement across the lifespan. We should be consistently applying lived experience, hospitality, and expertise as operating principles. And we, like Angela said, believe engagement should be addressed across all those ecological levels. And we know barriers exist, but we believe they can be viewed as design challenges and not family failures that require our creativity and intentionality. Trauma-informed strategies have to be core to your programming. And community partnership with systems is not optional. It's really how we bridge from serving families to standing with them. So next is Angela for some quick reflections.
Yes, I feel like we gave you all a lot to think about and a lot of homework to do. So take time to digest it. And I think the important thing is just starting somewhere. So we would like you all to think about what is one way that you can better engage kinship families in your work. Again, we talked about a lot of different strategies today, and even if it's something that we didn't mention, we'd love for you all to reflect with us. And while you all are reflecting, you can also put the next slide up with our contact information. And I think I would speak for Ali too. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're really passionate about creating systems responsive to the needs of kinship families and building equitable supports. So we would love to answer any questions or provide, any feedback to those that are interested. Ali has a really great example of a model on her website. You can also find KCC at kinshipcaregiversconnect.com. So please stay in touch, and we really just appreciate your time today. But don't leave yet, because there also is a survey after you share your response to the question. And I see Diane says, express an understanding of how overwhelming what they are doing can be. Yeah, and I think that just acknowledgement can go so far for families. Sometimes we can't fix everything that's going on, but seeing families, hearing families, and creating that space for them to share those emotions can really make such a difference on their journeys. Thank you all. I'm going to read through all of these.
Thank you both so much. This has been very helpful, and I see all these great comments coming in. Ro is going to launch our survey to ask you all what you thought of today's webinar and other ideas for future webinars. So if you take a moment to answer that survey. Ro, you can shut it when you think we have a critical mass, but it looks like we need to leave it open for a little bit longer. Thank you for participating. It helps us offer the content that's most responsive to your needs. If you've already answered this survey, you'll see on the slide that's up ways to request no-cost assistance from us here at the Grand Families and Kinship Network. Access to our past newsletters. We will sign you up for our monthly newsletter if you're not already signed up. And if you tell us not to, we won't. And then please follow us on LinkedIn, because we have a very active LinkedIn page where we share a lot of resources, not just from ourselves, but from our community of partners, including Dr. Caliendo and Dr. Tobin.